This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast and are not intended to malign any religion, group, club, organization, business, individual, anyone, or anything.
I'm Sarah Edmondson.
And I'm Anthony, air quotes nippy, Ames.
And this is A Little Bit Culty, a podcast about what happens when things that seem like a great thing at first go bad.
Every week, we chat with survivors, experts, and whistleblowers for real cult stories told directly by the people who lived through them.
Because we want you to learn a few things we've had to learn the hard way.
Like, if you think you're too smart to get sucked into something culty, you're already prime recruitment material.
You might even already be in a cult.
Oops. You better keep listening to find out.
Welcome to Season 6 of A Little Bit Culty. Hey everybody, we hope you are having an amazing summer. We are recording this special summer remix from Wave Productions in Vancouver, where I happen to have also recorded Yanya Lalich's book, Take Back Your Life, and also recorded many ad spots over my
behind-the-scenes content
illustrious career as a voiceover actor back in the day before I joined a cult and during the time I was in a cult. So it's all full circle here at Wave Productions. And to keep your culty content coming while we're on a bit of a hiatus, we've whipped up this summer platter of snippets from some of ALBC's episodes on the burning topic of Shmandmark, aka Landmark Worldwide. Keep listening for insights into Landmark and its founder, Werner Erhard,
also known as Jean-Paul Jack Rosenberg,
and the controversies surrounding the organization's alleged practices. We've got cult expert Rick Ross, former members like Anne Peterson, and investigative journalist Rob Copeland sharing their takes on Landmark. And listen, Landmark, we're not saying you're a cult. We would never. But from what we hear, you sure do like some cult-like inner circle coercive persuasion tactics and waging legal battles against any critics. So just saying.
More questions than answers there. First up, we've got Anne Peterson, who detailed her experience rising through the ranks of Landmark and the disillusionment that followed, and the motivation to pen her memoir covering the 15-plus year experience in the organization. In our first of two conversations with Anne, we talked through her earliest experiences at Landmark, her breakthroughs, and how some of these personal development tools actually work.
We loved this conversation. Here's some of our favorite parts.
So deeply embedded in the Landmark, certainly the Landmark version of the human potential movement, which I say Landmark are the big kids on the block. They claim to have over 3.5 million participants having gone through their programs. For those of us that were a part of it, I actually found that always a little bit sad because it seemed to me like it should be millions more. Because when you're in, that's not only is that your job, but that's your job because that's your belief. So I was deeply a part of Landmark. And then when I left Landmark, I had the opportunity, I was invited to host a program for Werner Erhard, who is known as the source of Landmark. That's how he's often referred to inside of the community. It is his ideas and his work that all of their programs are based on. They are the only organization, I believe, that is still licensed, if you will, to develop human potential, personal growth and development. That's what they call it. They want personal and professional growth and development programs. But it's all in the human potential realm. So they are the lineage. They are his lineage.
You've been in since 1995 to 2012. So you're the reason we're able to do this podcast, because everyone else we found till now were too peripheral to really pack the punch that we needed to...
We have the Nancy Salzman of...
I wouldn't say you're the Nancy Salzman because I don't think you're quite a perpetrator, nor are you...
In terms of access, yeah.
Listen, watching The Vow, trust me, I spent a lot of time on my couch going, oh, shit, am I Nancy Salzman?
You're definitely not. You weren't perpetrating, yeah.
No, but I was unseeing.
Yeah.
Now, we don't know how unseeing she really was, but I didn't know what I was looking at, particularly once I started working, when I started hosting the program for Werner and then working alongside, directly with him and alongside his immediate intimate circle and apparatus.
And we want to hear all about that. Let's go back to the beginning and set the stage. What was going on in your life. Who was Anne? What was the version of Anne that walked into the first Landmark event? Tell us about her and what drew you to it.
And who invited you?
Yeah. I was 23 or something, 25. But I had been living on my own since I was 16. I had my son when I was 15 and then had to move out. Literally, I used to have this dramatic story about I moved out on my 16th birthday because my mom told me you have to be out by October 1st and my birthday happens to be October 2nd.
Wow.
So I moved out, me and my son, literally got a job at McDonald's, still to this day, one of my favorite jobs, by the way, shout out to McDonald's. It was a great place to work. It was really fun. It became like my pseudo high school college atmosphere. I got in with a gang of friends. They loved my son. And then fast forward at 20, I meet a man who became my first husband. As that relationship going on, I have my daughter. He announced this to me one day, I'm going to leave you. My daughter's 2 years old. And I really thought when I met him, like I had defied all the predictions of that teen mom. I wasn't on welfare anymore. I didn't have 5 more children. I didn't think I was in an abusive relationship, but that's a whole other, it turns out that a relationship does become somewhat abusive. But he announces he's going to leave me and I'm freaking out because my I made it story is going to get torn apart. So I call my very best friend in the whole world who had been nagging me to do this program, Landmark Forum, for months, forever. And she'd even dragged me to an event where they quote unquote pressured me. I don't know if they really pressured me or not, but that's what it felt like. And I remember telling her, I'm not ever going to do this program because I don't want to know what I don't know. I don't know. What I didn't want to know was that I was in a semi-abusive relationship with the wrong guy, right? So fast forward, he's going to leave me. I think she's going to get on an airplane and come out and help me sort all this out. But instead, she literally screams at me on the phone, not until you do the Landmark Forum. Because when you do the Landmark Forum, even if you and Darren break up, it'll be a choice, not a decision. And I'm sobbing and, okay, I'll do anything. And she puts me on a 3-way call. We call the Landmark Center. Funny footnote, we have no way of proving this, but it's very likely that the person who answered the phone and registered me in the forum is my current husband, number 2.
Wow.
Because he happened to be the manager. He was the registration manager and it was a Monday. So the chances of it being somebody else that answered the phone, and when my girlfriend calls and says, I got my friend on the phone, we're going to register her in the forum.
Hilarious.
It was probably him.
Wow.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
But yeah, so it was really that I was a survivor and my life was falling apart. And my best friend in the world said, you have to do the Landmark Forum. So me and my husband did it together, actually. My first husband.
What was it like? What did it look like? What was your first impressions? Tell me everything.
It was kind of scary. It was scary mostly because I think I knew that was going to be some line in the sand that was going to cause a major change in my life. And that did end up being true. Where I lived in Seattle, the programs were done at the Seattle Landmark Center. So we had an office. I think it's one of the very few that's still there. They've mostly it's my understanding they've mostly shut down and gone online, but there's still a few offices. And I believe the Seattle Center one is still there. So you go down to the center and you walk into this, which is plain office building. It was nice. It was comfortable. It was simple. A few pictures on the wall. You go through these big double doors into this big room. It's like a giant, like a ballroom, but more of an office style look than the ballroom you would see in a hotel. Stage up front, all windows, but on the windows, all the blinds are closed. They don't want you being distracted. You know, you get there too, and everybody's so happy to see you. And they're congratulating you. I remember that was so wild. They don't even know me. You know, what do you mean they're congratulating me? I did register both myself and my then husband, about to become ex-husband, but we think we're going in to fix our marriage, right? And we're there together and he's being super weird. He ended up having probably what today, with the knowledge I have today, probably some kind of a break, like a bit of a psychological break during the forum. But we had been instructed, even though we were doing it together, to not really be together because the instruction was that we should each have our own Landmark Forum.
Yep.
And then we could come together and work on our stuff.
Funny, we used to do that in Next Team too. You always got separated as soon as you entered the doors.
Which I think might be a smart thing to do.
Smart. So you have this intention. What were you confronted with? Like, what were some of the initial ahas that you had about yourself?
Interestingly, I mean, it's not that I don't remember my forum, but most of I've done the Landmark Forum twice. And the first time I did it, which was that initial occasion, the whole thing occurs like this, like almost like white noise. Like when I look back at it, and I do remember somebody getting up and sharing about having been raped. There was this really dramatic thing, and she has this big breakthrough. I was sitting there trying to not pay attention to my ex-husband, who's being a weirdo in the corner. And for me, a lot of it occurred like, okay, that makes sense. Okay, that makes sense. I'm pretty skeptical. I'm pretty standoffish. Honestly, I was the kind of person then who never ever spoke in public. I shouldn't look people in the eye when I talked to them. And I was also very smart, and I knew it. And I was the kind of sat in the middle and went, yeah, I know that. I've heard that before. Yeah, that's right. I could agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
So that was how my forum went. And then my ex-husband has a whole freak out. My best friend flies out from Kansas City to be there for my Sunday night, which is where the graduates that invite you can come and be. She takes me to the table and she said, I know I said the Landmark Forum was what it was about. And you need that. You have to do in Landmark, you have to do the forum to do anything else. It's the main program. She goes, but my best friend walks me to the table and she said, but it's really the advanced course. The advanced course is like the thing. And she had been volunteering a lot, was very invested in the advanced course. It was the advanced course, honestly, that I had the biggest breakthrough. It was the advanced course that I really saw. They have this process where you like write the story of your life, and then you sit there with another person and you tell it to them over and over and over and over. And at some point they start playing like The Farmer in the Dell. I don't know if they still do this, but this was, back in 1996. And you start hearing this like nursery rhyme music. And literally what happened for me, and I now understand the design of it and what happens for most people in that moment, you all of a sudden realize you're not that story, that you are not that story. You have a story, those things maybe happened to you, but you're not that story. That was the most pivotal moment for me in my initial, like that. From there on, I was like, I liked the forum. It was great. My brother-in-law was going to do the next one. I went and volunteered. That was a weird experience. But that advanced course, which I did 2 months after the forum, that was the first place where I would say changed my life, because I wasn't locked into that story.
Yeah, we had a similar deciphering delusion.
Deciphering delusion,
ours.
yeah. Is that where the term is just your story? Because I know there's a lot of Landmark vernacular, story, racket. Tell us about some of those terms that you learn.
The story thing comes from a distinction they call the vicious circle. It's actually their plain Jane languaging of it's on their website, on their syllabus. But basically the vicious circle, and I've now listened to a little bit culty enough to hear that there's versions of this in lots of different groups, but there's what's happening and there's what you're making it mean, and they get collapsed, and then you're interacting from what you made it mean, not from what actually happened. So then what happens once you get that concept, you discover it for yourself. That's a big Werner term. Experience
Right.
it. You don't just know it like an epistemological knowing, but you actually experience it. Then you'll hear regularly like, oh, Sarah, that's just your story. That's just this. So that becomes the shorthand, right?
This podcast certainly would not be happening without our amazing, supportive, generous patrons. Are you with us? Come find us over on Patreon at patreon.com/alittlebitculty for bonus episodes, ad-free and exclusive content, and the occasional Zoom with fan favorites from our past episodes, Q&As, and all sorts of goodies. It's fun over there, people.
The Frankies were a picture-perfect influencer family, but everything wasn't as it seemed.
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here asking for help. He's emaciated. He's got tape around his legs. Ruby Frankie is his mom's name.
Infamous is covering Ruby Frankie, the world of Mormonism, and a secret therapy group that ruined lives. Listen to Infamous wherever you get your podcasts.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
You've heard from our sponsors. Now let's get back to A Little Bit Culty, shall we? Wow, taking us back to those heady days of personal development seminars.
Yeah, a lot of time in the penthouse.
So many similarities, it boggles my mind. It's sort of wild that we can have such similar experiences in completely, seemingly different organizations.
Yeah, the process is the same.
Yep.
Yep.
If you want to learn more about Anne's experience in Landmark, check out her memoir, Is This a Cult? Confronting the Line Between Transformation and Exploitation. You can purchase it on Amazon and hopefully one day on Audible. You can also find her work on illuminate.life, a learning hub and marketplace dedicated to the safe and ethical practice of providing personal development.
Next up, we've got Rick Ross, the OG anti-cult crusader and expert in all things LGATs. Rick is the founder and executive director of the Cult Education Institute. He's known internationally as an expert in cults and controversial movements. He's even testified in the U.S. federal court as an expert witness on cults. He testified in the NXIVM trial, if you remember. Rick joined us to talk about the parallels between organizations NXIVM and Landmark and why, when it comes to being culty, it might be more about the messenger than the message.
Let's see what Rick had to say.
Just the whole structure. The idea that you're going off for a weekend, that you're with other people, that all of your time is being scheduled, that there is this cathartic confession process that's going on one way or the other, in which you are saying, this is who I am. This is my pain. These are my issues. And you're opening up to people. And also that there are people around you who are more experienced in the LGAT than you are. They may not see themselves as shills, but they're there and they're encouraging you, and they're basically helping the facilitator to break people down, to move them, and so on.
Why do you think that Werner or EST or the forum hasn't been held accountable in the same way that NXIVM has?
Let me just say that at one point, Werner Erhard supposedly sold Erhard Seminars Training, which then became Landmark Education, which offers the forum. But in fact, his sister and his brother and his former attorney ran the company. And that was because Werner Erhard was feeling a lot of heat from the IRS and through exposés regarding his personal life. And there were allegations that Erhard Seminars Training was destructive. In fact, you can find abstracts and studies about psychotic breaks in the forum at culteducation.com as well. And at one point, Werner Erhard, by the way, was suing me at the same time that Keith Raniere was suing me. In fact, there was one point I was being sued by 3 different organizations simultaneously. But Werner Erhard, unlike Keith Raniere, he knows how to play it. Yeah. He is much more intelligent than Keith Raniere, which isn't saying a lot because I think Keith is an idiot, but Werner Erhard is not an idiot. And so he would settle with people that had personal injury claims in answer to your question. They would sue or they would threaten to sue, and he would pay them off. He would cut large checks. I was involved in one case in Texas called the Neff case, N-E-F-F, and that case was settled. And there were others that were settled. And in my particular litigation with Erhard, he was suing me for defamation and product disparagement, much like Keith Raniere. But when it got to a point where he realized that the aggressive discovery that was being launched by Peter Skolnick, by the way, who also was my pro bono lawyer, and Lowenstein Sandler and Michael Norwick in the Landmark lawsuit against me. When he realized that he couldn't break me through legal fees, that he wasn't going to get his way that way, now he was going to have to become more transparent. He was going to have to provide information. And the judge said it would not be sealed and it would be publicly visible. So then he moved to settle the lawsuit. And eventually, because I would not settle and Peter would not settle because we had no reason to settle, being that I could actually get a check from Landmark to walk away with a non-disclosure agreement. And then it would appear that they got something out of the litigation when they didn't. So what ended up happening is they dismissed their own lawsuit, which was humiliating for Landmark and for Erhard, but they did it. And unlike Keith Raniere, Landmark realized I'm in a losing situation and I'm just going to fold and move on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happened.
It seems like there's definitely a litigious action parallel between the two organizations. And yet Landmark seemed to proliferate at a much higher rate. How do you think that relates to their litigious strategy? Like, how have they been able to grow so much compared to Nexium, numbers wise?
Well, I mean, Werner Erhard, whose given name is Jack Rosenberg, he changed his name to Werner Erhard. And Landmark's philosophy is also a dash of a good deal of Scientology. And it's also a German philosopher by the name of Heidegger. And then there's a certain amount of what Erhard picked up from a rather benign seminar training called Esalen in Northern California. So Erhard's philosophy is a mishmash, a composite, just like many other people in the LGAT business. And I think what he learned from Scientology, besides what he incorporated into his training, is that suing people is a way to silence critics. And Scientology is perhaps the ultimate litigant in regards to silencing critics through litigation. And Erhard saw that as an effective way of doing it. And just so that your listeners understand, if you've got somebody with deep pockets suing you and you don't have pro bono legal help, you can go broke. And I speak from experience. I went bankrupt over a Scientology lawyer harassing me for years, who's now their lead counsel, Kendrick Moxon. So you can go under financially as a result of being sued. Unless you're fortunate enough to have somebody like Peter Skolnick who will step up and say, hey, I think you deserve to have free speech rights and I'm going to help you. So that's what Landmark did. They would silence critics through litigation. They would pay people off in settlements that had personal injuries. And Erhard was very clever. He's almost 90 and he's still working. For those that don't know, I think Werner Erhard still pulls the strings at Landmark Education. And nobody really knows the details of the sale because it's a privately held company. So Erhard, per my understanding, is still very much the leading light of Landmark Education.
Depending on how things go, when I call Peter Skolnick to ask for his help regarding doing this episode, even in of itself, when we even mentioned Landmark in passing, and we didn't even do an expose, just somebody who was sharing some little bit culty things that happened in her journey, and we got our first cease and desist from Landmark. And
their merit badge.
It's just, shocking that we've done over 150 episodes and this is the first group that's come after us. And you and I spoke, Rick, and I shared this with you. And I was a bit shocked to see it was really like a press kit of all the reasons why they aren't a cult. I'm thinking the lady doth protest too much. And I'm wondering specifically the part where they say that Margaret Singer even says that it's not a cult. And it's in your book, but can you share with our listeners how Landmark manipulated Margaret to say that it's not a cult?
Look, Margaret did not think Landmark. I knew Margaret quite well, and we talked about this. Margaret Singer, a clinical psychologist, eminent cult expert, probably the cult expert of the 20th century, she wrote about Landmark in a book that she wrote with Janja Lalich called Crazy Therapies. And in that book, they talked about Landmark, but they did not explicitly state that it was a cult. And I do not consider Landmark Education to be a cult. I would consider it a little bit culty. And I would say this, that when Werner Erhard was really present and he was running things and he was the charismatic leader that they called the source, at that juncture, in its early days, in my opinion, Landmark was in fact a cult. But as Erhard stepped back and became this kind of shadowy figure that people knew about but didn't really deal with, Landmark ceased to be a personality-driven cult that had a leader that they worshiped as they once did Werner Erhard. Now, having said that, I have more than reason to believe that there remains an inner circle of staffers that are practically like slave labor that continue to serve Werner Erhard to this day. And I would say that it may be that group could be seen as a personality-driven cult because Erhard is ever present. Erhard is pulling their strings. Erhard is dealing with them on a day-to-day basis. And that would be the inner circle of what is Landmark education today. Yeah, Landmark, Margaret Singer settled with them for the same reason that, John Hockman settled with Keith Raniere. Because when will it end? When will the litigation end?
Right.
And I can't afford to keep shelling out money for lawyers to defend me because this group or individual will keep suing me and appealing all the way to the Supreme Court because they have deep pockets and I don't. And so I'm going to settle. So that's what Margaret did.
It kind of leads me to, and I'll say it for any Landmark lawyers who happen to be listening or Erhard lawyers, that I don't even have to call it a cult or not a cult. There's some unhealthy, toxic practices that I see in this organization that I think can be very problematic for people, and people need to know what they are. When they take a cheap weekend that helps you have some transformation and self-awareness, which can be at the onset very healthy and helpful if it just ends there. But when, commit to the long-term path, for us, it was the straight path. For Landmark, it's the teaching and the assisting and the essentially slave labor where it gets problematic.
Well, and also when someone asks you to sign away some of your civil rights before you can participate in a weekend intensive, that should be a huge red flag. Why do you want me to surrender my rights? If I went to a marriage and family retreat, they wouldn't do that. If I went on a church event like a Crescio in the Catholic Church, they wouldn't ask me to do that. Why are you? If I went to see a therapist, they would not ask me to waive my right to sue them for personal injury and that I would be obligated to binding arbitration as opposed to just suing them for personal injury. So that is what Landmark does routinely when people come to take their weekend retreat. They ask them to sign certain waivers, certain understandings. Right. That is just a huge warning flag. And let me say that for years, people would say to me, Rick, you haven't done Landmark. You don't know what Landmark is really. You have to do it, Rick. You have to do it. And then you can be a critic. And I said, I don't smoke cigarettes, but I know it's not good for me. Do I have to smoke them for 10 years before I can be able to say that they cause cancer?
Great metaphor.
Finally, people from Landmark said to me, we will pay for you to do the forum. And I finally said, okay, fine, I'll do the forum. And I was going to do the forum in New York. And then the next thing I know, they said, no, I get a call from one of their lawyers. And he says, no, you're not going to do the forum, but here's what we're going to do. We'll give you a tour of the forum. You can drop into different things going on in the forum with me at your side to be your guide. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I want to just do it. And these same enthusiasts who were trying to pay my way through the forum kept calling me and saying, are you going to do it? When are you going to do it? When is it going to happen? I said, no, they won't let me do it. And, they want me to do the tour. And so the next thing I knew, there was more pressure, I guess, from these supporters of Landmark to Landmark administration. And they came back and they said, okay, you can do the forum. You can do it as a participant. And I said, okay, I will do it, but I will not sign any waiver. I will sign no paperwork at all. And that was the end of it. They would not allow me to do it. And so it's interesting. People say, well, you can't criticize the forum because you haven't done it. Well, they won't let me do it unless I sign my rights away, which I refuse to do.
For more background on what brought us here, check out Sarah's page-turning memoir. It's called Scarred, the true story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life. It's available on Amazon, Audible, and at most bookstores. If you want to see that story in streaming form, watch both seasons of The Vow on HBO.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
You've heard from our sponsors. Now let's get back to a little bit culty, shall we? I like Rick. He's very pragmatic.
I love Rick invoking the name of our podcast in there. There is just such a thing as being a little bit culty. Rick is a wealth of knowledge on the subject of cults. If you want to dive more into his work, check out his book, Cults Inside Out, How People Get In and Can Get Out.
Okay, so we've heard a lot about Landmark, which doesn't seem to be nailing it when it comes to not, ending up being nightmarish. For the dessert course of this little Landmark spread, we'll round this out with one of my favorite episodes with finance reporter Rob Copeland, who joined us for a deep dive into Wall Street's seedy underbelly and how its leadership can feel just a little bit culty at times. Rob's work explores hedge fund Bridgewater Associates and its famed cult-like leader, Ray Dalio. Here's that chat with Rob. And for the full episode, just take a look at our show notes or scroll down on our feed.
We just did 2 episodes on Landmark. I do have verified proof from ex-Landmark grads because people have been coming to us and they've been saying, did you know that Ray Dalio did Landmark through Vantos, which is like the VIP section?
I did not know that.
Yes, that's what I get to tell you something new about Ray Dalio. So yeah.
You're a little bit of a sleuth
I'm
over
a
here.
sleuth, yeah. So like the things that were similar, just so you know, were specifically like the public. I've got some notes here from my spy. Drilling people in meetings, so radical transparency, the principles, going back in the past to find the source of the error. Like that's all classic Landmark, which I knew already before reading your book because we just prepped for Landmark, which by the way, Landmark, Scientology, NXIVM, it's all like, it's hard to know now what came first, but it's all overlaps of the same principles. And actual principles, not like Ray Dalio's principles.
That's wild. I would love to learn more about that offline.
Yes.
You know what's so great about that too?
Part 2.
Exactly, part 2. You guys get a second season. I just get a paperback.
Yeah.
What I love about it too is that because Ray always loves to claim that he came up with it all, that this came from out of his study of history and that he started to come up with these rules. He would hate to credit that he took other classes or that.
Well, that's why I was so curious, is that because like Vantos apparently is like the private, there's so many different things in what we call now the wacky world of Werner Erhard. There's Werner, there's Landmark, there's the Forum. Now I know about Vantos, which basically was the group where it was for private premium corporate clients. So Bridgewater was a client of Vantos, apparently according to my Landmark insider.
That's fantastic. And you're absolutely right. One of his favorite things is root cause, is finding the root cause of something. And it always winds up being something, there you go. I mean, it's always something about you.
Right. Well, that's the gaslighting. The inherent thing in all of these people, whether it's Ray, Landmark, Scientology, the gaslighting is built into the structure of like trying to figure out what caused this in the best way possible for the growth of everybody. Sounds really positive. It's not. It is not. Because it also deflects responsibility from the leader, which is like the thing that I thought was so crazy about your book is that all these things that happened, none of it's his fault. Can never be his fault.
Never, not once.
Like,
he takes credit too.
No.
It's his fault for hiring you. It's one of the great flips ever. If he was like, this is my fault. I gave you too much responsibility.
Sidebar, just to relate it for our audience. This is, I don't know if you're following the Dan Schneider case with the Nickelodeon in Hollywood expose, right? So he did a public apology, I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt anyone. Like that was a different era. I would never do that now, blah, blah, super, super apologetic. And at the end, he asked like, what would you do differently? He said, well, I'd have a therapist on set. I said, great. That would have been amazing to have somebody for the kids to talk to. No. The therapist would have been there to ask the kids when they signed up, do they really want to do this? Do they understand how hard it's going to be? And I was like, you can go fuck yourself. Like, you are disgusting.
Do you understand that you're going to be molested? Is that what the therapist was supposed to say?
Yeah.
Like,
exactly. Yeah. That you may or may not be. Do you understand that this may be part of the job? Fuck off. Sorry. I get a little riled up.
It's unchecked power too.
Yeah. But the thing with Landmark brought up this, ongoing conversation we've been having, like, when is leadership good? When is it bad? And when do these methods become exploitative? And when does it go from growth to coercion? It's like the ongoing debate in this particular arena. So I just loved your book. I did read it I listened to it on Audible at 2 times the speed for efficiency speed. So for me, it read like a thriller. It's like, and then he did this, and then he did that, and then blah, 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 blah. And my heart is racing the whole time because of the speed.
What I actually love about the book is I left out a lot of stuff about the book because I'm trying to make it a thriller. I'm trying to make it like this dark thing where and it's surprising and you think you know where it's going to go and you think that someone's going to be a hero. Maybe they try or maybe they don't try. It's like it's stranger than fiction for me. And it's not easy. It's a book that takes place over 50 years. And remember, these are real people. They're all real people to try to get, that past the lawyers. And what's remarkable is I love the book. It's crazy. It's wild. After the book came out, just a few months ago, not a single complaint, not a single lawyer letter, no lawsuit. It's like, oh, I could have gone even harder.
Right.
Well, the truth too, like you have to have, this is the radical transparency that the book is bringing forward and they don't like it. So
yeah,
it would make sense that they don't do that. Also, it draws attention to your book.
They don't want to, they don't want to give you your...
That's fair. That's true. But it did well. And it's my favorite feedback that I get from people occasionally is they'll be like, I didn't really learn anything about finance. And I'm like, oh no, yeah, this isn't supposed to be in the how-to section. Maybe how to escape from a personality-based organization.
Yeah, I learned about finance.
Oh, good.
I felt like because I've never understood hedge funds or that world at all. So I feel like I have a better understanding and I will not go there. I did learn about that. It just fortified a lot of my beliefs around these types of personalities. Is there anything we didn't ask you that you feel like is important or that you want our listeners to know or that we didn't cover?
No, this was honestly wonderful. I feel like we got a good taste of everything. I would correct you on one thing I think you said early on, which is something like no one gets physically hurt or something. There is some physical coercion.
Oh, yeah. Okay, tell me.
And it is gender-based. There's one character in particular who she's very low-ranking and she becomes involved with the CEO. And I won't spoil what happens, but to me, there are a lot of examples of this at Bridgewater, but I chose just to have one because I wanted to show the reader what happens when sort of a younger woman gets involved and tries to speak the truth about what is happening between her and the CEO. And remember, they have different baseball cards, so she's much less credible. So this is how, when you apply sort of like vanilla sexual misconduct and you try to put it inside this radical transparency, what happens? To me, I found that very disturbing just as I was writing it, because it was like there's so many moments there where you say, just go to the police or just, tell your spouse or tell someone outside of Bridgewater. But when you're in an organization that forces you to adjudicate these disputes inside based on their quote unquote system, imagine what happens.
Like what you hear, do you? Give us a rating, a review, and subscribe on iTunes. Every little bit helps us get this cult awareness content out there. Smash that subscribe button. You know you want to.
That was Rob Copeland. And if you want to learn more about the cults of Wall Street, check out his New York Times bestseller, The Fund, a fascinating read. I read it on Audible, perhaps a little bit too fast, made me a little bit anxious, but it was fascinating.
Well, people bow down and adore people with a lot of money.
That's true.
No, that's why those people get away with it.
Okay, people, you've been listening to our greatest hits from Landmark Worldwide Conversations. We'd love to know what you think. And Landmark, really, just take a hard look at yourself, if you will. Remember, personal responsibility is one of the tenets. Why don't you apply it to yourselves? Okay, that's it for now, everyone. We'll be back with all new episodes soon, and we have amazing stuff coming up, including brand new guests never before heard from ever in the course of this podcast here in Vancouver.
Who is it, Sarah?
Who is it going to be? Go to join Patreon to find out. It's going to be lit. Have a great summer.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean. I'm hanging on to
Thanks for listening, everyone. We're heading over to patreon.com/alittlebitculty now to discuss this episode. In the meantime, dear listener, please remember, this podcast is solely for general informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. It's not intended as a substitute for real medical, legal, or therapeutic advice. For cult recovery resources and to learn more about seeking safely in this culty world, check out alittlebitculty.com/culty resources, and don't miss Sarah's TED Talk called How Cult Literate Are You? Great stuff.
A Little Bit Culty is a Trace 120 production, executive produced by Sarah Edmondson and Anthony Nippy Ames, in collaboration with producer Will Rutherford at Citizens of Sound and our co-creator and show chaplain / bodyguard, Jess Temple Tardy. And our theme song, Cultivated, is by John Bryant.